something away from today. Quick introduction to myself. So my name is Emma. I've been with eCom Scotland and eCom USA for 5 years now, with a focus on learning technology. So kind of a consultative service through to sales and key account management of our clients. Prior to joining eCom, I have an oil and gas background. So I worked as a document controller. So I've been very process-driven data analytics for the best part of my career. And I'm always curious as to the why and the reason and the drivers behind we do what we do. So moving into learning technologies was quite a nice transition for me. And very quickly, just an introduction to eCom. For those that don't know who we are, eCom Scotland and eCom USA, we have an extensive multi-sector background in digital learning platforms, content and strategy. We create innovative learning solutions aimed at increasing learning engagement and driving productivity to help organisations achieve their goals. So our products and services address a whole range of workforce management, development and training challenges, including online assessment, which we'll be talking about today. And we are actually celebrating our 25th year this year, so we've been around for a while, and we do have our sister office located in Athens in Georgia for eCom USA. So moving on to slide 2, just a very quick session overview of what we'll be talking about today. I know we've got about 15 minutes, so we'll be quick. Looking at the traditional approaches to observational assessment and even defining what that is for those that are maybe unaware. What does going digital mean? What does that bring to organisations and users alike? What does the future hold, especially given the kind of environment we've found ourselves in the past 12 months? I think that's a question kind of on everyone's lips at the moment. And then I'd like to finish up by kind of sharing 2 case study examples of different observational assessments that have kind of taken that digital approach, and some of the successes and challenges that we have found that may give you some food for thought if it's something that you have done previously or are considering to do. So what do I mean by observational assessment? It's maybe an obvious question, and I'm sure most of you, or all of you, depending on the poll results, will be aware of it at least, and have taken part perhaps in an observational assessment at some point in your life, whether as a candidate or perhaps as an assessor. However, if I was to be put on the spot and asked to define, I would say that an observational assessment, especially the traditional approaches, involves obtaining evaluative information through direct observation, whereby traditionally candidates would perform tasks in front of an assessor, so traditionally face-to-face. As this happens in real time, it is a much more objective form of assessment. It does not rely on the assessor's memory of what happened, but instead facts and real-time data. Typical scenarios where we see this type of assessment being used, and I'm sure you do too, ranges from compliance training, so generating the correct evidence of competency and skill set, leadership development, where expert opinion and feedback is essential. It could be on-the-job assessment, so monitoring how individuals are responding to issues, perhaps challenging customers or introducing new processes. And lastly, it could be apprenticeship tests, so assessing programmes of work. And the kind of 2 examples that I'll be sharing just shortly kind of cover the kind of compliance side and that apprenticeship kind of vocational assessment environment. Just moving on to slide 4. So what do I mean by going digital? Is it as simple as replacing pen and paper and moving to an all singing, all dancing online system? Sometimes, but not always. The pervasive use of mobile devices has allowed online observational assessment to become a reality, and organisations are continually inventing new ways to use this delivery model. And this can mean using technology to help complement, or in some cases, fully run observational assessments from end to end. Certainly our experience is where assessors will typically move to using a mobile or a tablet device to allow them to interact with the candidates. This means that organisations then immediately get a view of all the assessments taking place. They can see how each assessment group is performing, sometimes in real time. And they're able to set up global marking schemes or rubrics independent of the assessors and provide scores and selected criteria. So in turn, allowing them to produce standardised and fairer results across defined target groups. So this kind of immediate access of data really opens up opportunities when it comes to taking observational assessments online. And we find that this blended approach is really working, and what clients are definitely moving towards. Which leads me on to the next question, which I'm sure I could ask all of you and I would get a very different answer each time. And I'm curious to hear what you think the future does hold, particularly for observational assessments. I think it's fair to say that if the last 12 months have taught us anything, it's that it's always good to have a backup plan. And we've certainly seen this more and more, both with new organisations and existing clients alike, approaching us to discuss pivoting existing observational assessments to a kind of digital model, both for online and, interestingly, offline delivery models. The use of online video conferencing tools, as we are all joined today using one, has increased tenfold, more than I think anyone could imagine. And that is now, we are seeing, playing a big role in what we may consider the new normal for remote observational assessments, where face-to-face is still unattainable, or simply because organisations have started to see both time and cost-saving efficiencies with the removal for travel, for example. I am personally really interested to see how things change when restrictions do ease, and see what happens if we do go back to that traditional approach, or will this blended model be more palatable to both organisations and their end users. I think so far feedback has definitely been mixed, and again, just kind of relating back to Cheryl's presentation, some people have adapted very well, but we are in danger of almost isolating or alienating certain audiences where perhaps digital confidence or ability to use digital isn't quite there yet. And I think that's something that we all have to be quite mindful of as we talk about going digital. But certainly at eCom, the past year or so, the past 2 years, we have been working hard behind the scenes to invest in what we would consider a future game changer for assessments, and that is with our virtual reality assessment offering tool, eNet Reality. So very briefly, this was a groundbreaking project for us at eCom. I believe I can confidently say one of the first virtual reality kind of environments used for combined learning and assessment, and the assessment part is what's key here, allowing you to link your assessments to learning outcomes to then be linked up with qualification bodies. We've worked very closely with some awarding bodies in the UK and some kind of national colleges to ensure that that assessment focus is there. So what this is allowing users to do is create a VR environment using their own 360 imagery or 3D footage, no coding required. Learners are then consuming the content via their chosen VR headset or a mobile device or a desktop VR experience anywhere in the world, with accessibility features built in. Sessions can be reviewed and replayed by assessors for feedback and scoring. So really a multitude of options there, certainly moving assessments into what we would consider the future. And we believe it will open up new possibilities for observational assessment because of 3 kind of key principles that we believe play a big role in offering. And that is relevancy, consistency, and transparency. So relevant to the workforce and therefore a more accurate reflection of whether an individual has acquired the skills they need. Consistent, since all candidates will experience exactly the same environment for their assessment, which is so crucial when you think of any practical outdoor assessments. For example, one that we worked with a client on was an archaeological dig outside in Scotland. You can't rely on the weather gods for that. It was very hard to ensure the environments day to day were kind of that consistency and ensuring that the candidates had that replicable environment. So moving that to VR was definitely ambitious, but very successful. And lastly, the transparency aspect. So assessors can see exactly what the candidate sees. So they're seeing the environment, they're seeing the assessment through the candidate's eyes, which does make this a great tool for observational assessment at a distance, where perhaps that face-to-face or that kind of in-person observation isn't possible for whatever reason, health and safety, dangerous environments, or purely if we find ourselves with continuing restrictions. I'm going to move on now to talk about one of our case studies, just as I kind of wrap up this brief overview of our thoughts and experience of observational assessment. And the first one is the Scottish Joint Industry Board. And we're really proud to have worked with the Scottish Joint Industry Board for a number of years, supplying the technology for their endpoint assessment for apprentice electricians. So SGIB apprenticeships culminate in a final integrated competency assessment, which is booked into an online session. So the system uses a scenario, issues a scenario randomly, and the correct observational questions are available to the assessor through a tablet. The assessor then issues a set of instructions and directs the apprentice to the booth set up with the particular scenario, which is to be completed within 2 days. So this is quite a long assessment, a lot of skill involved, that is over a longer period of time as opposed to a traditional assessment, which could be done and dusted in a few hours. The assessor needs to be able to complete their observations across a cohort rather than one apprentice at a time. So for context, an assessor for SGIB would perhaps have maybe 4 to 5 apprentices working in their booths, and they would be splitting their time accordingly, observing them all during that 2-day process. So as you can imagine, there was lots of benefits for SGIB and their stakeholders. If I was to highlight a few that were quite kind of standing out to myself, the first one would be that going digital meant that the assessor time was reduced, not only from a time-saving point of view, but financially for getting those involved. There's no paper write-ups or manual input. And I don't want to speak for the audience, but I certainly know for myself that the only person that can interpret my notes is me. Yeah, there's a saying in the UK where you say someone has kind of like a doctor's handwriting. It's more of a scrawl. That's definitely me. So by reducing that kind of paper copy of notes and feedback and saving time for inputting the system was just so valuable. There was also the increased assessor confidence because they have all the information they need at their fingertips, literally, with an intuitive interface. So as well as the kind of marking interface and the questions and the kind of the key points or the rubrics that they're observing the candidates working on, they can also have supplementary information, so model answers, guides, best practice, all available to them quite quickly, and having that kind of information very quickly, as I said, in a nice intuitive interface did build the confidence, even for those that initially were maybe a bit reluctant due to a kind of a lack of digital skill. And lastly, there was, as you'd expect, better tracking of learning attempts. The use of tablets by the assessors meant that they could not only input textual feedback, so written feedback on performance, but they could also supplement that using real-time imagery and video evidence, which helped the candidates build up a portfolio to go towards their kind of qualification that their apprenticeship was part of, and really kind of support and bring to life the feedback that we're getting. So not only just saying a candidate A failed to complete X, Y, and Z, but actually showing them perhaps where they went wrong and giving them that kind of really evaluative feedback that they would maybe not necessarily get should it just be kind of a transcript of written notes. This was a really successful project that is actually still used today, and a really great example of how observational assessment can go digital with a somewhat smooth transition. And I say a somewhat smooth transition because it isn't always plain sailing. And this is the anecdote that I kind of wanted to share with you on kind of lessons learned about how initial user testing, which is such an important phase, definitely puzzled us. And we got some feedback that assessors were struggling to input their feedback into the tablets, and the results weren't recording, it was intermittent, and it was just really not a great experience. So it turned out that with the assessors themselves being ex-electricians, they had actually burnt away part of their fingertips just for the nature of the job. Therefore, touchscreen technology was not their friend, and that's where the kind of problems were arising from. And it was only once we troubleshooted the cause through observation, how else would we do that? That we were able to introduce alternative input methods, so predefined statements for ease, using a stylus, etc., which really resolved the problem. But it just goes to show that you should never take anything for granted when it comes to technology, and to say, really consider the needs of your end users. Because certainly from a personal point of view, that was something that wouldn't have just never have crossed my mind, to think that their fingertips would not be kind of compatible with touchscreen devices. Certainly something I take for granted, being able to flick away on smartphones and tablets. In the last case study, just before I wrap up and we move into kind of our Q&A session, a slightly different scenario for you now, on how a leading worldwide provider of equipment and components using oil and gas have been leveraging observational assessment to evidence employee competency on specialist equipment. And this is all to report back to their clients and give confidence to their clients that the team they're providing are meeting the kind of requirements around skill set, and obviously those legislative requirements as well around health and safety, especially in oil and gas. That's so important. So tracking skills and knowledge, as I said, in high pressure environments is really important. And that confidence was something that really pushed them into kind of really investing in observational assessment. The kind of unique aspect from this, and kind of taking it away from just an online observation assessment like the last example I gave, was obviously the environment. So these candidates, they're offshore on rigs internationally, with very intermittent internet connection. Sometimes the internet connection is obviously restricted to common areas. Some are lucky to have it in their cabins, and kind of varying degrees of connectivity, which can't really be relied on. So an offline approach was needed, which is something that definitely challenged us. But we were able to work together to kind of get that approach so that the observational assessments could take place, again, on tablets. All the schedules, the model answers, the marking guides were synchronized locally on the device, and assessors then could complete as normal. And when they get back into an area of connectivity, either on the rig or when they come back on shore, they could sync those schedules back for reporting. The kind of online approach was really attractive to the client, not only because they were reporting to their client. They previously had spreadsheets and bits of paper flying around, and it was very data driven but not very attractive. So a big push for this was making sure that the reporting was actually really attractive to their client. And in the end, they give their end client access to our system, and they can view live time reports, permitting that some of the offline syncs have taken place. Obviously, that's always a risk. They can very quickly at a glance check the skill set and the compliance set for the crews on board on their rigs at a rig level, a crew level, or an individual level, and flag up any important feedback from the assessors that they need to know about. So again, just pivoting that kind of face-to-face assessment piece, but introducing technology to take it online, advance it, and really help with that kind of evaluation of data. And it's made such a huge difference to not only the morale, but again, time saving, cost savings, and the like. And so, conscious of time, I will pass back for the panel session.
Great, thank you very, very much, Emma. Actually, and it was a fantastic presentation. I think one of the areas that you touched on there